Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to the Princeton Public Library. My name is Jamie Herman. I'm the manager of adult programming here at the library. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to the community room on this rainy morning. Thank you for coming out in the rain. This is our final book brunch of 2023, but we will be coming back on January 7th with a book brunch that I'm very excited about. Amy Jo Burns, who has been at the library many times as a moderator for our events, including last year when she was the moderator for a Frederick Bachman event, which was a great event. And her new book is coming out, Mercury, and I've read it. It is wonderful. It's set in Pennsylvania. It's about a family of roofers. It's really great, and it just got listed as an indie next pick for January. So that'll be January 7th that we will have Amy Jo Burns here for our next book brunch. But now I'm going to introduce our author and moderator for today. A few housekeeping notes. This room is equipped with a hearing loop that pairs with T-coil technology if you need hearing assistance. And make sure that your electronic devices are silenced, please. And we will have an audience question and answer at the end of the presentation. And we want to extend our thanks to Labyrinth Books of Princeton for both being our event partner and bookseller today. And we will have a book signing after the event. As you can see, the books are available for sale. So, today's book is about a wisecracking, inquisitive, and bombastic girl named Selam, who is the youngest child in a large, boisterous family. It is set in southwestern Ethiopia, and the setting is the 1980s. And so Selam and her father listen to the radio in secret as the socialist military junta that recently overthrew the government seizes properties and wages a civil war towards the north. It is told through the perspective of Selam, who is a very charming and irresistible and inquisitive child. She is just a wonderful narrator. And so it's about what happens, though, when mother, God, and country are at odds, and how one very difficult child learns to find her own voice. Our moderator today is Wendy Belcher, Professor of African Literature, with a joint appointment in the Princeton University Department of Comparative Literature and the Department for African American Studies. Working at the intersection of the diaspora, post-colonial, medieval, and early modern studies, she has a special interest in the literature of Ethiopia and Ghana, and is working to bring attention to early African literature, particularly that of African languages, through her research and translation. And I'm going to be welcoming our author up to the podium to do a reading, and then they'll do the conversation. So Mihret Sibhat was born and raised in a small town in western Ethiopia before moving to California when she was 17. She is a graduate of the California State University, Northridge, and the University of Minnesota's MFA program. She was a 2019 Public Space Fellow and a 2019 Minnesota State Arts Board Artist Initiative grantee. In a previous life, she was a waitress, a nanny, an occasional shoe shiner, a propagandist, and a terrible gospel singer. She's currently a miserable arsenal man. Welcome.
Thank you so much for being here. You could be home right now, sleeping in, listening to some melancholic music, but you're here. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the Princeton Public Library and Labyrinth Books, Dorothea and Jenny for giving me the opportunity to be here. I would like to thank my friend, Professor Wendy Belcher, for being here and for also her support for my writings throughout the years. This book would not have happened without her. I'm not kidding. I wrote most of the book in her house, eating her food, living in her house. I had come to house sit for her one summer, but then I sprained my ankle and I ended up staying more, and then the pandemic happened. And then I ended up staying for 13 months, like the best writing fellowship ever. So yeah, I sold my book while in her house, found an agent, all of it. So if you are an aspiring writer here today, I highly recommend kidnapping Wendy after this program. So I'm going to read from a chapter near the beginning of the book. This book is set in a small town in western Ethiopia about a decade after the socialist revolution. It's narrated primarily by the child protagonist, but there are a number of POVs in it, and this one that I'm about to read is a third-person narrative very close to the perspective of a group of women in the community. I wanted to start the book with a kind of a helicopter view of the setting. And I felt that a group of gossiping women in the neighborhood would be like the perfect people to do the job. Is there something wrong with it?
Yeah, it's popping.
It's possible. You don't have to be so close.
Yeah.
Good now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So the gossiping women of the neighborhood are going to give us a kind of an idea of what the setting is like. Funny enough, this passage takes place on a rainy morning. On a rainy morning in August, a month ahead of the 10th anniversary celebrations of the revolution, a group of women gather at a house in the center of town to drink coffee, eat bread, and marvel at a thing that's been growing inside the troubled belly of Gitu Galeta, a former landlady who lives in the greenhouse next door but is clearly too good to join her neighbors for coffee. That's what you're supposed to be doing on a rainy morning, gossip. It can be a child, can it? They whisper amongst each other. No, it can't be. She has that disease that's been making her bleed for over a year now. You don't get pregnant while bleeding. No, you don't, they say. No, you don't. There's been confusion in town over the question of how to deal with the Gitu situation. Ever since the news of her abnormal bleeding got out, there was an incident involving a soiled Habesha kameez at a wedding. Women of the neighborhood have been sympathetic, her sickness having sucked the vigor out of their revulsion for that aristocratic louse. The revolution has spent the last decade teaching people how to hate the former landed gentry. Sometimes farmers marching through town would pose in front of the Gitu's house chanting, "Death to bloodsuckers, death to bloodsuckers," forcing her and her husband to lock up their doors in fear. The revolution has offered no instructions on how to behave when former bloodsuckers start bleeding themselves. Women of the town don't know what to do, and it isn't just a matter of figuring out one's moral stance. There's also confusion over whether expressing sympathy for people like the Gitu amounted to a counter-revolutionary act. The Gitu and her family are not entirely isolated from the community. She's been to the same funerals, weddings, and baptisms as the women. She's also a member of the town's Mahaber, an association of Christian women, where she's known for her dedication to service, inserting her imperialist face at every event, arriving at functions ahead of everyone else, taking on cooking duties never even assigned to her. That is sometimes more annoying than her past as a landlady who made her tenant farmers cough up the last cup of grain she was owed. It is more annoying than the fact that despite losing her large tracts of land, her coffee farms, her business, and 2 homes, she lives in a house with an elevated concrete foundation, multiple rooms, and cement floors. At least that house isn't what it used to be. The exterior is the kind of green you would get if trees could shit and had diarrhea. It hasn't been green in the truest sense ever since the Gitu spent what must have been the last of her monies on a sewing machine. Or maybe that's what she wants people to think. Those former feudal lords might sometimes wear pilling sweaters with missing buttons, but they could be hiding a stash of gold bought at a discount from people who have fallen on hard times. The point is not joining her neighbors for coffee. But despite not joining her neighbors for coffee, the Gitu is very much part of the community. And the problem is everyone knows the list of counter-revolutionary acts as a living act. So although it has been mostly safe to interact with the Gitu so far, things might change tomorrow. Even seemingly upstanding citizens who have always been poor might turn out to be members of some counter-revolutionary movement. So much happens in secret, which is strange because in a town as big as a bull's forehead, you think you'd know everyone. You only get a full picture of your neighbors when they get arrested, or in the case of those who haven't been seen since the Red Terror completely disappeared. You have to always be alert and ready to abandon people, for anything that's good today might turn out to be counter-revolutionary tomorrow. This is a list of activities currently known to be counter-revolutionary. Number 1, joining or cooperating with counter-revolutionary groups backed by Western imperialists, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, and other historical enemies. Number 2, grieving for and attending the funerals of those eliminated by the revolution. Number 3, possessing reading materials produced by counter-revolutionary elements. Number 4, listening to the radio stations backed by imperialists. Number 5, refusing to carry out revolutionary duties assigned to one by the people. Number 6, refusing to hoist the beautiful flag of the beautiful Ethiopia during national holidays. Number 7, defecting to a foreign country. This list is subject to modifications, and ultimately your imagination is your only protection. You must always try to imagine how anything you do might be deemed counter-revolutionary after the fact. It doesn't matter how small and benign the act is, like that time an old man who had one too many glasses of Dutch asked if the commission for organizing the party of the working people of Ethiopia was a man or a woman. He was summoned to the police station by the comrades to explain himself. Or like the group of kindergartners who threw stones at the home of a big comrade and ended up being detained by the police for several hours. Compared to these transgressions, coming to the aid of a former landlady appears egregious. This is especially so considering that reporting a former aristocrat or anyone who partakes in forbidden activities or activities that seem forbidden is the easiest path to getting on the good sides of the comrades. Everyone knows the revolutionary government doesn't care much for due process because the urgency the revolution demands leaves no time for courtroom debates. Nobody wants to be a jealous neighbor's breakfast, and for what? To be nice to that woman who lives in a house with several rooms and cement floors? It's her own business. On the other hand, the women feel that having a chronic illness that makes one bleed so much should result in a person's removal from the counter-revolutionary category because their own body is countering them, and there's no point in wasting punishment. But in a revolutionary state that detains kindergartners, asking for common sense is like hoping for a meal to give birth. I think that's all I have time for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihret, for reading such a beautiful passage and for writing this amazing book. It was a privilege to be there as this book was being birthed, and I'm very grateful to Mihret for her work and for, yeah, it's a little bit, how about now? Is this good?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. We're having mic problems today, this morning. All right. I met Mihret about 10 years ago now, and it was at a talk where she gave a very memorable comment, and I asked for her email, and I still remember the first email I ever got from her, because it started without greeting or anything. It was right in, like, I'm pretty sure my mother and my grandmother. That was the first line of this email, and it was just kind of bursting with stories. And that's my impression of her, that she has a story for every occasion, and that they never repeat. And I felt this way about this book too, that it was just bursting with stories, that you'd get introduced to a character and get a short anecdote, and you thought many a person would have devoted an entire novel to that one little story. So the question I have for Mihret is, how is this possible? Why is this that you are such a font of anecdotes and stories?
Can you hear me?
No.
I am technologically left behind. So I think, well, that reminds me, like when I was little, people used to come to me for information on who was dating who in the community. Because I had become a spy, a little spy. I think the reason is because being a youngest child, I am not just the youngest child, there is like a 12-year gap between me and my immediate older brother. There's this alienating feeling. I don't know if there are youngest children in here, and if you identify, there's always this sense that your older siblings have like some weird special connection going on, and you are on the outside watching. So on top of that, so my mother passed away when I was 3 years old, and nobody really told me. They said she's coming back tomorrow. I mean, in Ethiopia, they feel like a child cannot handle such things. So at least in my experience, they didn't sit me down and say, you know, your mother is dead, she's not coming back. So, but I was suspicious, like something is going on. So I always had to find out things through other espionage. Basically, I spied on my siblings and my family a lot. And so I ended up finding out other information that was valuable to other adults. So they would come to me and ask, what, you know, who's dating who and what are they saying to each other. I don't know how I find out, I find out. So there was that. I think that's one of the reasons. Like I was alert all the time, so paying attention. But also, I think as a late life baby, most of my siblings were out of the house or going to college or work, and my father and I ended up spending a lot of time together, and he would tell stories endlessly. And I just listened to him, like my mouth open. And so I gathered so many stories from him, and I sometimes, thinking back, one of my cousins who was very close to my late mother would tell me all these very inappropriate stories that a child should not hear, but I listened. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe anybody was, you know, taking the time to tell me things about my mother. And also because of my mother's stance, I'm walking down the street and some old lady from, you know, a neighborhood down the road would grab me. My gosh, you're growing up. You know, your mother, she was like a man. She was so strong, and then she would end up telling me something about my mother. So it's just like I just became these repertoire of stories for various reasons. So I think, and also I think because I'm a slow learner and I use stories to explain things to myself. I think there's a famous quote out there about how, I don't know, stories are for stupid people, and I just, I can't remember who it was, but I mean, that's me, I'm the stupid one. I love stories. Stories are how I learn how to explain complex ideas to myself. So that's I think that's why.
I think, though, I remember something where also people would say, you know, don't tell Mihret because she cannot keep a secret.
Oh yes, absolutely. I would get in trouble, like especially around the transition when the government was overthrown. There was a lot of fear in the community because we didn't know what was coming next. So people would hide things, and my family. Actually, I put this in my book. They were trying to hide cash. Our ceiling, it's complicated to explain, but somewhere in the ceiling they were trying to hide cash. They waited for me to fall asleep. But for whatever reason, I was suspicious of their behavior that day, the way they were behaving, so I stayed up. I'm like, something is up. Yeah. And I found out they were hiding money. And so the next day I went and told the boys outside that I play soccer with, and I got in massive trouble.
I would imagine.
Yeah, I just, I revealed so many family secrets, but there are no rules around secrets, which is truly confusing. My father would come home from Addis with new clothes for me, and he would say, do not wear it for a while. I'm like, why? People will think we have money. I mean, for him, you know, having lost everything to the revolution, he's always paranoid. But there's also this concept of, like, in the countryside, the evil eye. You know, if you have something, people are gonna want it, so you need to be very secretive. But for me, it was confusing. What am I supposed to do with new clothes? Like, am I? At some point, I have to walk out of the house wearing them. And so I just, I leaked secrets. That was me. I was the whistleblower.
Yeah. So you have the perfect components of a novelist, is that you're a keen observer for a variety of reasons, and you can't help yourself, you're compelled to tell stories. So when I first met you and you were sending these amazing emails, I know we were having conversations about going to an MFA program, because I'm like, how are you not a novelist? Like, you're clearly already a novelist. And you said you felt there were things that you needed to learn to take that next step. So what was it that you thought you might learn in the MFA program, and what did you actually learn? Or if they're the same thing?
I mean, I think that I received poor formal education most of my life, so I'm always going to feel behind everyone else. And also, I'm very insecure about my English because I had to learn it. And, I mean, I've been in the U.S. longer than I've been in Ethiopia, but I still feel like I don't really know English. It doesn't come out of me. It always, it's like this weird construction that happens in my mouth or on my fingers. You know, Amharic, my mother tongue, kind of leaps out of my insides, whereas English is always sitting on the outside. And so I think I'll always feel very inadequate. So like the act of writing in English will always be an act of reaching for me. But in terms of craft, I absolutely was at kind of near zero. I mean, I told stories, but there's a huge difference between telling stories and becoming actually a writer of fiction, right? So when I went into the MFA, I mean, I had all kinds of really embarrassing secret opinions. Like I was like, sometimes I don't understand why writers would go into this detail describing things. And I'm like, is anybody gonna remember this? Like, why are this is just fancy stuff trying to show off, you know, your English to me or something. And of course, I mean, those are like basic things you learn in creative 101 classes, but I never had that opportunity. And so in the MFA, I learned what those things are actually doing. They're not just there just to fill up the page or because the writer wants to be fancy. They're serving particular purposes. But I think most importantly, what the MFA did for me was expose me to writers that I would not have found on my own, and just kind of like drop me into this literary world where people talked about books a lot and read books, and kind of exposed me to this so many ways of writing. Sometimes I think the issue is you would have so many ideas for writing, but you don't know how to get it out of yourself. But when you read books, different books, then you're like, wow, so I can write like this, I can write like this. This is, you know, when I was writing this book, like so many books, I was taking instruction from so many different books on how to tackle specific problems that I was having. And of course, the workshop. The workshop, really an irreplaceable experience because you're not just having your work critiqued, but you're also learning how to read other people's works. And you're also learning that literary feedback is kind of ultimately subjective, because when you take criticism outside that environment, there's this tendency to just be hurt by it. People are, you know, there are people who can't take criticism because they think the thing that person is saying is absolute. It's like the final word, or is 100% correct. But what happens in workshop is someone would say something to you, and then someone else would check them by saying, no, I think you misread the text. You're not, you didn't understand it correctly. And so you learn that criticism is just really part of an ongoing conversation. It's not meant to attack you and kill you. It's just meant to kind of open up a different angle for you to consider. So. Really, I can go on and on about the MFA. It was a fantastic experience.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about is I know that my impression of you as a writer is that you were just hilarious. And I was very worried about you going to an MFA program and having that stripped out and becoming very serious and writing about despair and etc. So were you worried about that, or did you feel like that was an issue, or not really?
No, I think MFAs get a bad rap. I don't know why. Like, people say terrible things about that. That was not my experience at all. I think people were really trying to help me achieve the goals that I set for myself in my work. And I did not have an experience of people trying to impose their opinions or like their views of what my work should be like. It was a very nurturing environment for me. And I remember you saying that to me, and throughout the MFA I was terrified of learning everything. So I was like, I have to filter things. I'm not here to be altered. I'm just here to learn some important things. But I found that fear to be ultimately kind of, I don't know, maybe misguided, but maybe may have been useful. But I think that, no, it was not. My humor was definitely encouraged, I think, yeah.
So shout out to the University of Minnesota MFA program.
Yes. By the way, I'm not getting paid to say these things.
So, I mean, as many people here know, I also spent a little part of my childhood in Ethiopia, far north of where you were. And, I mean, if you were raised in a Christian household or evangelical household, Ethiopia is just this, it's like living in a story, right? There's a descendant of King David on the throne, there's a throne, there's oxen threshing grain in the fields like in the Bible, there was a castle in my backyard, like an incredibly magical place. And I always wondered, like, does Ethiopia have some kind of, I don't know, corner on the market of narrative? Is there something about Ethiopia or Ethiopians that has some kind of, I don't know, unique connection to narrative?
I think my my hometown is more of the monkeys fighting on your rooftop kind of place. Monkeys coming to my backyard to steal my papayas. But I think that this is probably true of other African countries. In the part of Ethiopia that I grew up in, at least, so much of art still belongs to ordinary people. Like when you go to these traditional bars where they sell honey wine, there would be an asmari, a man who walks around singing and playing a masinko, an Ethiopian violin. And patrons would say to him, take my lyrics, take my lyrics. And so they're improvising. He said, okay. And then they feed him lyrics, and he's playing his instruments and singing out their lyrics. And farmers sing songs as they're working. When you go to a wedding, at least in the countryside, there's no DJ on the podiums. Everyone is singing, like using their voice and singing and clapping and dancing. At funerals, you're not just crying, you're saying things out loud about the person who died. There's actually this tradition of hiring criers. I think young Ethiopians call them funeral DJs, but they're people that you hire to come and cry out lyrics that are supposed to kind of pull at the strings of your heart. And even the way that works is it's a call and response format. The person is standing in the middle saying things, and you're responding to them and beating your chest and running, like going in circles. So it's like even everything turns into like some kind of music. And so I do feel that maybe that is very helpful to the entire process of storytelling, because it's such a huge and integral part of life, poems and songs and lyrics all the time. And stories, of course, endless stories told around charcoal fire and rain mornings like this, we're drinking coffee and talking and gossiping. And I think those things are quite helpful, but I don't know about Ethiopia having that special thing. I do have a feeling it's more a case in more traditional societies everywhere.
Families have, of course, a huge place in your book. How they work, how they claim each other, how they disappoint each other, how they misunderstand each other, how they carry each other. Why do you think you write about family?
I was saying this to students last week about how my first drafts are always written with the heart. It's a very emotional process for me before I bring the brain into it. And so I need, it's not enough for me to know that writing is important, art is important, and that it's something that I want to do with my life. I need these emotions to propel me. And I feel, of course, I don't know, as with everyone else, families are like a source of all these huge emotions and emotional confusion, tension, and especially so is my family, because I think that, I often think about why do I even talk to my siblings? I really have no reason. There is no rational purpose to it. Like with my siblings, when I do something right, it's because God made me. When I do something wrong, it's because I'm possessed. I have no agency. I do not exist as a person. And one of my sisters would call me and say, "How are you?" And I say, "Well, I don't know. You should ask the spirits. You should ask the demons inside me." And so it's a very, I don't know. I have a very toxic relationship with my siblings. They don't. We exist in completely different dimensions where they talk to God on a regular basis. Like there was a time when my sister would call me and say, "I had a dream about this." you should not go to XYZ. Why? Because I had a dream. It's, are you kidding me? I live here on Earth. And so that's, it's very, very difficult for me to communicate with them. And with the ones in Ethiopia, it's always, there's this dynamic in our relationship where, because we grew up in ultra-communal societies, it's basically the individual has a very small place and it's all about the community, which I love, but sometimes it becomes so that I am supposed to send money all the time without asking questions. When I complain about that, they really don't understand. I'm like, what your job is to work and support your family. Why are you, it makes no sense to them, right? And I try to explain, how that would hurt my feelings. I'm not just an ATM machine, I'm a person, etc. But it's not clear to them. And so I ask myself all the time, why do I keep talking to these people? But I love them, I can't get away. It's so this push and pull, this love-hate thing, it generates lots of incredible emotions that I find to be like a fuel, but also just a source of drama. Like there's a brother that I don't like at all. I think he's a terrible person. But like I love him so much. Like I would literally take a bullet for him. I'm like, why would I do this with this despicable person? But yeah, it's just the source of this endless tension that I find, I don't know, maybe there's a psychotic phase. I find it useful for writing. So.
One of my favorite lines of yours is that fiction is the art of mercy. Fiction is the art of mercy. So that's what you're saying.
Yes, that's true. I think that the more I write about my siblings, the closer I feel to them, the more I end up loving them, which is kind of defeating the purpose of it. But I'm tired. I can't get out of this.
Okay, well, I want to ask you a question about the God chapter, one of my favorite chapters in the book, which is written from God's perspective. And to get us started, if you wouldn't mind reading the second paragraph of chapter 34, then I'll ask my question.
I have asked myself why I made all this.
I should start by saying this is written from God's perspective.
Okay.
The I is God.
I have asked myself why I made all this. I used to regret it all more often in the past. I almost flooded out the earth once. I remind myself of how I was before the beginning of time, before I invented love, when I was alone in the dark nothing, afflicted with a merciless thirst that would never go away or kill me. I tried to eliminate myself on numerous occasions, but I always came back to the dark nothing with a merciless thirst. I tell myself it's worth putting one's body and soul through such unspeakable pain if it meant escape from eternal aloneness, if it meant feeling a sliver of warmth in my heart. You and the devil want to know how I became God, who gave me my power. I want you to know that I am God because I embraced the devastation that comes with making love possible.
Very nice. And it's like any chapter or any paragraph in a book, when you pull it out, it's very beautiful, but in the context, it's even more, after you've been reading all these chapters, I don't know, that chapter always makes me cry. So part of what's happening in this chapter also is that there's the Department of Rare Prayers, another reason to read it. So I think part of the reason I moved is that I grew up in an evangelical house, but I'm no longer a believer. Like I do believe what Paul Tillich said, that that than which nothing greater can be conceived. That there is something immense, but that cares about me is something I cannot access. So one of the things that fascinates me about you is that you grew up in a Pentecostal house, you were a preacher, you were casting out demons, you were in it, fully in it, but that you no longer consider yourself a person of faith, but that you're constantly talking to God, all the time talking to God, and saying, God doesn't exist, and also, Jesus Christ, help me. So if you could explain a little bit about this, that would be great.
Well, it's about the fiction as mercy thing. Actually, in the process of writing this book, I was healing my relationship with God, or like this figure that I consider to be God. I'm also, I don't know what the name for me is. I used to say I'm an atheist, but it's not because I don't think there is God. It's because like if he exists, I just don't want to worship him. Like we can talk to each other if he wants to, but no worshiping, and he can forget about having 10% of my income. That's not going to happen. But I think that growing up, it was religion was kind of imposed on me. When I was little, I used to ask those questions that children ask. A child's logic, like who created my father, his father, and his father, and his father, and then like, who were the first people? Adam and Eve. Who created Adam and Eve? God. Who created God? And like, never ask that question again. And so, and another anecdote that I put in the book also is I was obsessed with this secular song when I was about 4 years old. Now I listen to the song, I don't understand why I was obsessed, but I think it was like, it really appeals to a child, and I was told to choose between the song and Jesus Christ. And I chose the song. And I was told that was the wrong choice, and which was maddening, because I'm like, why would you even ask me if the only alternative is the wrong choice? And so religion is always kind of used as a weapon for silencing, and so I grew up associating God with that kind of tyranny throughout my life. And there was a lot of actually physical punishment for refusing to go to church or things like that. And so God was, in my mind, when I was growing up, a tyrant, or at least an instrument that tyrants in my life used to oppress me. But in the process of writing this book, and because I had to really, when you're writing fiction, you have to think about your character deeply, about, not just the things that make them cruel to you, but you have to go behind the enemy lines to see what they might be like. And in the process of that, I think I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but I kind of fell in love with him a little bit. And so now I acknowledge him as an invisible friend. I am comfortable talking to him. It's not that I feel he's going to come to my rescue if I get in trouble, but he might give me ideas or talk me through it. So he's kind of like this, no offense to any religious person. I mean, I think of him as I take him seriously as I take any other fictional character seriously, but he's the longest that I have spoken to, that I've talked to, that I'm most familiar with. So I have kind of affection. I feel warmth in my heart when I think about him, talk about him, and talk to him, but once again, I draw the line at worshiping. It's not going to happen. So that's why. This is a bizarre religion that I am constructing.
Yeah, and emerging as we speak. I like the part about the fictional character, that they're kind of the same, because not many novelists, their characters are quite real to them and talk to them and engage them. But I believe Jesus was telling you something yesterday about this talk. So Mihret, like many people, kind of dreads these occasions, and she was telling me something, I forget what it was. What did he say?
Yeah, I asked him, I'm like, why have you afflicted me with performance anxiety disorder? And he said to me, well, imagine if you were good at these things, what would you spend your time doing? I'm like, applying for teaching jobs, seeking speaking engagements, and so on. Exactly. You would be spending your time on something else when what you want to be is a writer. And it's like, I'm using anxiety to get you to focus on the things that you actually want to do. And I'm like, Jesus, why not just tell me to my face? Why not just tell me, shut up and sit down and write? And he said, consider your history of how you've reacted to people who tell you to shut up. Do you listen? I'm like, wow, you're a genius. That's what I said.
I think that's a great place to end a conversation between us. So now we open it up to questions. If people have questions for Mihret about the book or anything we've talked about. Yes.
Okay, we're here.
First of all,
Thank you.
I'd like to congratulate you on a fantastic story. You managed to sustain the emotional power from page 1 all the way to the end. I don't see that very often in a book, so I just really want to sort of show my amazement to you to sustain that all the way through. And I think what was so wonderful about your story, it's so complicated. And there are some really heartbreaking moments. There's a lot of darkness that you're referring to and real events from your country. And I wondered about the tone. You've got this glorious comic tone. And I wondered about your choice of working with that tone. Did you choose that, or did the tone choose you?
This is a question from a really amazing novelist, by the way, so that's the amazing question.
Know her name, know her face. I think that the comic tone was critical to me writing this book, otherwise I would not have, I think. Whenever people suggested that I should write about my life, about my childhood, I just didn't see the point of reliving all those tragic events. The moment that changed it for me, that convinced me that I could write a book, is hearing the story of the circumstance surrounding my birth for the first time. In the real life version of the story, so my mother had uterine cancer when she conceived me. So she was bleeding prior to my conception, and people in the neighborhood didn't understand how someone who's bleeding, just like I was reading earlier, they were like, how would you have, conceive a child when you're bleeding? So they're like, it's gotta be a tumor, right? And then, the child starts kicking, and they're like, okay, it's gonna be like something missing limbs and, disfigured or something. And then later they're like, it's satanic pregnancy. It cannot be normal. And there's a speculation. I thought it was hilarious that people are saying all these things and they could not believe it when it came out, and I had things, hands and legs and everything. Yeah, my sister, when she told me the story, she's like, so, and you were born, and then we kept waiting for you to die. You didn't die. Every time you got sick, we're like, this is what we've been waiting for. Finally, she's gonna die, but you didn't die. So we concluded, when you grow up, you're gonna be a moron. But look at you, you're not a moron. I thought it was hilarious, and I'm like, okay, so this is something I could write, like I could fictionalize it, and and make it even funnier. And so when I started writing that, it felt more natural. Things kept coming out of me, and then at some point I was making fun of my mother's cancer, and I'm like, wow, if I can do this, I can, make anything funny if I want to. And it was liberating. And Lydia Davis has this quote about how in writing, setting difficult targets for yourself can lead to difficult emotions coming out. And I think that was it for me. I had to take these tragic raw materials and make them funny. And in that process, so all these difficult things came out. So maybe the tone chose me, I think. Something like that. Yeah, it came to me.
I'm thinking about the tiger, and the child imagines that she's a tiger and that she has to restrain herself. Otherwise, a lot of people are going to die really terrible deaths. And that one of the most amazing moments in the novel, where all that humor about how funny it is, the reader seeing that, of course, she's not a tiger, that then the child has to confront this, that the child is not a tiger, and that's just such a devastating moment that comes out of all this funny stuff until this moment, and then you're like, oh my God, that was a really hard moment to read.
Okay, other questions? Oh.
Yes. I want to thank you for your honesty, and also I think your sense of humor and your frankness make some very serious subjects palatable to a lot of people. And I think sometimes when we talk to someone who we know has a different position in religion or politics right now, sometimes if you share in a story like you do, why you have an opinion like that, what happened in your life that you have that opinion, they may accept how you think better, and you're just a joy to behold. I thank you so much for who you are.
Thank you so much. That's very sweet, thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. I was going to ask about the cover. It's such a great cover. Did you have input into that, or was that just? And how do you feel? The cover to me is so attractive.
I did have some. I sent my publisher a message saying I want something like. I said I don't want anything abstract. I want something that's very clear that might have to do with my days as a propagandist. I just want to communicate. But you know the Morton's Salt Girl?
Yeah.
As I said, I want something like that. I'm like, I love that child so much. So that was all my input, and then the designer came up with this, which I like because she seems like she's telling God, come down and debate me, like defiant.
I really think the cover tells you just so much about the story, and it is the perfect depiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad it was not an abstract cover, because I think it draws people into the book. Especially, I think that's important for a first-time author, to have a cover that's different and it's going to draw people in. I think that's one of the first things that attracted me to the book, as well as the writing. Okay, are there other questions? Or did we have such a good conversation in a quiet crowd? Oh, here, one more question.
Are you working on another novel now?
Oh yeah, you're working on something else?
Yes, I am working on my second novel, and it's early days, but I think all I can say about it is it's about the political implications of vanity, but once again, it has something to do with the Bible. So that's why the Bible is like, teach your children early on, and when they grow up, they'll never get away. That's me. Can't get away. Thank you.
And are you still being here in Princeton for a while now?
That's the thing. I also can't get away from Wendy's house.
I spend a lot of time in Seattle with my elderly parents, and so Mihret very kindly house sits for me, and then stays so that I can enjoy her charming, amazing company, as you all now know.
Yeah, and I've been traveling a lot, so it's been so wonderful to have Wendy to come home to, and she houses my book in her basement, my books, boxes and boxes in her basement, and so I'm just in and out of her house for now. Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming here today to talk about History of a Difficult Child. I'm going to encourage everybody to read it if you have not yet, and of course get a signed copy to bring home. Makes a wonderful gift for this holiday season.
Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Dorothea, for Labyrinth being here.
Yes. And thank you. Yeah, the library works so closely with Labyrinth, and it's a great partnership here in Princeton. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and that concludes the